team like Kyrie and KD, or the Lake Show with King James and AD. Wish I could match him up with the bad boys from the 80s, but no black and white, I need that in HD. HenDawgz.
Yo, what's good, y'all? It's your boy HenDawgz, and we back to it. You know how we do it. I watched an NBA game from every decade. I think this is gonna be a pretty good video, y'all. Before we get into it, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're on the way to 10K. My goal is to get to 10K by the end of next month. So I need y'all to help me out, man. If you've been watching my videos and you're not subscribed, go ahead and hit it real quick. It takes 2 seconds. And if it's your first time watching, trust me, you want to subscribe, you want to see more of my videos, because I got one of the best YouTube channels on YouTube. And I don't even want to brag, but I think I'm doing a pretty good job. But it's a whole lot more where that came from, so you gotta subscribe to stay in tune. But go ahead and like this video if you like this video, and go ahead and write something in the comments. Let me know what decade you grew up watching, because I was more of a 2010 to 2020 decades of watching basketball. So I think it's gonna start in the 50s. So it's gonna start in 1950s and it's gonna go all the way to today's game. And it's a 32-minute video too. So I think I'm gonna break it down into 3 parts. So this will be part 1, and I'll do 2 more parts after this one. So let's get into it. Let's see what the 1950s was talking about. I don't even know who the best player in the league was in 1950, but that's what this video is for. So let's get into it. I watched an NBA game from every decade. Let's get it.
I watched an NBA game from every decade, starting in 1950 all the way up to this year's NBA Finals. It took me well over a month, but I condensed each game into a breakdown for this video. Along the way, I focused on a variety of key themes. How has the skill level and athleticism of players changed over time? How did the three-point lines change shot selection and spacing? Did referees used to officiate the game differently? How have X's and O's evolved? And were players in the 50s really plumbers and firemen? I also focused on the biggest superstars of each decade. Bill Russell's in the video. Dr. J is in it. Larry Bird, Magic, Kareem, MJ, Kobe, Shaq, LeBron, Steph. They all make appearances. Settle in, grab some popcorn, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and let's watch some basketball.
Okay. It's gonna be a good video, man. So go ahead and grab. I got my energy drink right here. It's about 8:30 in the morning. I like to do my videos in the morning because I get good, natural light and all that stuff in here. So I gotta have my energy drink. So go ahead. I don't know what time it is when you watching this video, but you gotta go grab you a drink. Gotta go grab you some candy or energy drink, coffee, whatever, man. Go get something to get you comfortable for this video. Shout out to Hoop Vision.
Finding full game footage from the 50s isn't easy, but YouTube has the majority of a January 7th, 1950 matchup between the Fort Wayne Pistons and the New York Knicks. That was the first season the NBA was known as the National Basketball Association. The league was founded in 1946 as the Basketball Association of America, but changed its name prior to the 1950 season. The style of basketball back then was very different than it is now. For example, look at how the majority of players shot free throws. But beyond just that, the gameplay itself was also very different.
I don't get why did players shoot their free throws like that. Like, I think that makes it harder. It's just people just like every single day people was just shooting like this, and then at one time one person was like, wow, that is easy. Like, what made somebody just be like, you know what, enough of this, and let me shoot it like this and see how that works for me, because I think that's a way easier shot.
Pistons-Knicks game started out about as sloppy as possible, with a combined 5 turnovers before a single field goal attempt had been taken by either team. When the ball wasn't being turned over, shot selection was erratic. Despite there being no three-point line, players would fire up 30-foot two-point jumpers at the basket. And you can see why the league average field goal percentage was just 34% back in 1950.
Oh, shit.
No team in the NBA shot above 40% from the field that season.
He just shot it
The
with his
most
offhand.
popular type of shooting form during the game was the set shot, meaning instead of shooting what we now call a jump shot, players would plant 2 feet on the ground and almost chest pass the ball up to the hoop with 2 hands.
He hit it.
The next most common way of shooting the ball was the 1-foot runner,
Okay,
jumping
floater.
off of 1 foot and shooting what we now usually call a floater. But at one point in the game, there was one particular shot that stood out to me as something closer to what we might see nowadays.
What's that?
Watch how the player rips through and dribbles to his left before rising up for a jumper. It's
pull-up.
closer to the technique we'd see today from someone taking a mid-range pull-up.
Okay.
There were also tons and tons of hook shots from the Knicks and Pistons. Sky hooks, running hooks, baby hooks, you name it, and this game had it. As soon as the ball went inside,
move.
the post player was looking to get to his hook shot, even if it meant taking one from 10 to 15 feet out. Later in the video, I'll show you how post play has evolved over time, but at this point, it was all about the hook shot. Had social media been around in 1950, passing was the one area of the game that would have...
So before we start talking about passing, they said the hook shot was very, very popular. So did Kareem not invent the hook shot? I mean, I know his is called the sky hook. I know it's a difference. But I feel like Kareem just kind of saw what they were doing and kind of mastered his own shot to make it, a little bit more unstoppable. But in my head, I always thought that Kareem was the first person to ever come close to the sky hook / hook shot. Like, nobody else did that. But in the 50s, they like, hey, that's pretty much was the most popular shot. But I get it. Kareem just perfected it and made it, more of a sky hook, more unstoppable move.
Made for some legitimate highlight tapes. I was surprised at how many flashy
Look at pass.
passes the game had. Like
What?
no-look passes or behind the back.
What they call?
And that passing was especially on display when the
Look at
Knicks and
pass.
Pistons were running the fast break. Because the court was so clogged in half-court situations, getting out in transition seemed to be the best option for creating efficient looks.
They moving, though.
X's
They-
and O's
they running.
wise, there wasn't a whole lot to analyze back in the 50s. But the primary half-court offense was a dribble weave, with the players handing the ball off to each other back and forth on the
I don't know
perimeter.
what these
By
refs
the way,
call it.
the weave is still used by teams today as an entry into different set plays. Offenses will now start a possession with a weave out on the top, get the defense moving or distracted, and then flow into another action. There was no shot clock back in 1950, so the weave theoretically could be infinite, lasting as long as necessary for the defense to break down. But that wasn't really the case until the Knicks went up late in the game. Only in the fourth quarter did they begin wasting time by repetitively moving the ball out on the perimeter. The 24-second shot clock would eventually be implemented 4 years later in 1954, which leads us into the 1960s.
Let's see what the
a
60s
decade
talking
that
about.
was dominated by Bill Russell and the Boston Celtics.
So 1950s, yeah, the talent wasn't there. I saw a lot of terrible looking shots. Shots that if people was taking them in today's game, the coaches would tell them not to shoot. The one thing that I will say that I was impressed with was the fast break, though. Like, they were getting out. Like, it wasn't just like no slow man's game where everybody was just taking their time in the half court, shooting these ugly shots. Like, no, they was getting out and running. It almost seemed like it was getting out and running just as much as they was in today's game. But that was my couple takeaways from the 50s.
For the rest,
I didn't see any players I knew either, though. What players played in the 50s that is still talked about today? Because they said Bill Russell came in the 60s. I don't know any player that played before Bill Russell. So if there's one player back then that you could say that's pretty, famous today's game, let me know who that was. Excuse me.
to the video, every game selected is from the NBA Finals. Starting with the 1963 Finals between the Celtics and Lakers. I went into watching these historical games expecting to see a very controlled and disciplined style of play. We always hear how basketball used to be more of a team game, with fundamental passing and ball movement. But the 63 Finals was surprisingly frenetic. Celtics head coach Red Auerbach was known for introducing the fast break into the game of basketball, but both teams played very fast and at times a little reckless. Just watch
was
this
your
sequence
Baylor?
during the first half, which featured one fast break after another, neither team interested in slowing the ball down. In fact, I started noticing there were a lot of possessions where the Lakers or Celtics made 0 passes before taking a shot.
Jerry
Unlike
West.
what we're usually led to believe about old school basketball, this game from 60...
He missed it, but that pull-up looked good, man. The game feel like it got a lot better in just those 10 years. Like, I wasn't seeing too many nice-looking pull-ups like that in the 50s. And already in the 60s, Jerry West got a 2020-looking pull-up already.
3 didn't feature a lot of passing, and instead had quite a bit of one-on-one play. Another narrative we often hear about the 60s is that players couldn't, or at least didn't, dribble with their left
no
hand.
left hand.
We've all seen those videos of guys awkwardly moving to their left while dribbling with their right hand.
Oh my God.
To test that narrative, I charted every single dribble from the first quarter of this game. In total, the Lakers and Celtics combined for 280 dribbles in the front court. 219 of those were right-handed dribbles, or 78%. That sounds like a lot, but I wanted something to compare it to, so I picked a Lakers-Celtics game from this season in 2022. In the first quarter of that game, the teams combined for 278
Pretty
dribbles,
even.
a similar amount of total dribbles. But now, just 55% of those were with the right hand. A pretty significant difference that supports the narrative that players in the 60s were less skilled.
Had
as
no
ball
left
players.
hand.
Back to the game now. As you'd expect,
Terrible
Bill
defense.
Russell was a difference maker defensively. He
Good
blocked
defense.
shots and protected the paint all game long for the Celtics. But besides from shooting a couple skyhooks per quarter, he was more of a role player offensively. The biggest difference between the 60s and today was spacing. The game was played with a packed paint, making it very hard for the offense to generate open shots. Watch the spacing on the ball screen here. The handler dribbles right into his teammate in the post, giving him nowhere to go. Same thing on this pick and pop. The players are spaced on top of each other.
Since it was so congested right there and like hard to move, would y'all say that implementing the 3-point line kind of helped that out? Because, I mean, it makes sense. Like, why would we just, space the floor out when there's no 3-point line? There's no point. There's no point to be out there. Like, you should be trying to get as close to the rim as possible because every bucket counts for the same. So putting that 3-point line out there, I think, for me personally, I think that helped, with the spacing and, it made it not as clogged up in the paint. But let me know what y'all think.
The game was officiated differently as well. Referees were much quicker to call traveling violations. Nowadays, players are given much more leeway
That was
when
not no
catching the
trouble.
ball on the move or bobbling a pass.
Bro, look, the
but
ref
in the
got me weak.
60s, any even slightly awkward movement was usually called.
Stop it,
foul.
ref.
The game was also not nearly as physical, with referees calling fouls as soon as any type of contact was initiated. Offensive fouls were especially different. The defensive player didn't need to be set or to fall down to take a charge. If the offensive player
Terrible
initiated
call.
contact, it was called an offensive foul.
What?
From an X's and O's perspective,
I'm glad the refs got better because those calls right there were awful. Like, I don't know what I mean, it's the same way how they said the talent wasn't that good. I don't think the ref's talent was that good either because I don't know what they called it.
one of the Celtics' favorite concepts was scissor action. They would bring Bill Russell out to the foul line and then have their guards cut off of him like in the shape of the scissor. It's another concept still used by teams today. And speaking of concepts still used today, the Celtics also initiated offense using pistol action, with guards handing the ball off to each other and setting a screen out on the wing. Many years later, that action would be one of the primary options in Mike D'Antoni's revolutionary 7 seconds or less offense with the Phoenix Suns. Next up, we skip ahead to the 1977 finals between Dr. J's Philadelphia 76ers and Bill Walton's Portland Trailblazers, a series that was won by the Blazers. The game is starting to get more modern. I mean, we even have a nice flop from Lloyd B. Free while trying to take a charge.
Shout out to my guy World B. Free. If you have not tuned into Winning Time, I had the opportunity to play World B. Free. That was one of the characters that I played in Winning Time. I want to say episode 4 or 5. I'm not 100% sure, but if you haven't watched it, go check it out, and you'll see me on there playing number 24. He actually was playing for the Clippers at that point, though, not for the Sixers. So that's just a little fun fact for y'all.
The announcers called it an acting job. Let's recap the state of the game so far. We saw that jump shooting form was pretty ugly in the 50s. By the 70s, we're starting to see more modern shooting, with guards now taking smooth off-the-dribble jumpers on balance and off of 2 feet. It might not be Steph Curry, but it's a big improvement from this.
It looked real good, and I think that's why we got to give Jerry West his credit, because they kind of skated over that a little bit. And, said how they went from 50s to being terrible jump shots to the 70s where it was getting better. Where that's probably true. Like, it was probably still terrible, but it was that one guy who looked good back then. And that's why he stood out. That's why he's the NBA logo. So shout out to Jerry West, man. Shout out to Jerry West.
I haven't talked much about athleticism yet, but there was little to no dunking in the games from the 50s and 60s. There was this Bill Russell putback dunk off of an offensive rebound, but that's about it. That's now changed in the 70s as well. On one of the first plays of the game, Bill Walton rolled to the basket and dunked on Dr. J. In general, the Blazers-Sixers game was played above the rim, with alley-oops and players catching bodies. Referees called a tight game in the 50s and 60s, leading to less physical play. That's still largely the case in the 70s. For example, with the 76ers losing, Henry Bibby tried to jumpstart a comeback by pressuring the Blazers ball handlers to create a steal, only to be called for 3 ticky-tack reach-in fouls in a row.
Terrible call.
One area that's still lagging behind in the 70s is ball handling. Consider a superstar player like Julius Erving. Obviously, he's one of the best dunkers in NBA history. He had the body type of a modern big wing like a Jason Tatum or Paul George. He hit tough, contested fadeaway jumpers all game long against the Blazers, excelling as the Sixers' go-to guy in isolation situations. But the area of his game that didn't quite line up with modern NBA wings was his ball handle. He largely played with his back to the basket, backing his man down and shooting over the defense instead of relying on quick dribble moves or crossovers. The biggest improvement from the 60s to the 70s was the ability to move without the ball and read the defense. Watch Doug Collins on one of the first plays of the game. He walks down to the screen, sees his man is cheating in the paint, and then fades out to the corner instead for a jumper. On this play, Collins comes off of a pin down, sees his man is trailing him, and then curls the screen to get all the way to the basket.
That's something I learned in college. That's something I learned in 2015. If they're trailing you, you curl. You keep curling, But if they try to shoot the gap and try to beat you, in front of the screen, and that's when you fade. That's something that you learn at a high level. So that's something we learned in the 70s. So it ain't new.
Both the 76ers and Blazers used off-ball cutting and screening to free up players for open shots. The on-ball screen wasn't nearly as big of a part of the game as it is nowadays. But motion offenses were beginning to be developed that relied heavily on off-ball screens. We'll see even more of that in the 80s from Larry Bird and the Celtics. The Blazers used their center, Bill Walton, to initiate that motion offense. Walton would catch the ball around the elbow area and then act as the distributor, looking for his teammates cutting on the weak side. That's very different from anything we've seen so far. Remember, the post players we saw in the 60s were all about the hook shot. Their offensive responsibilities started and ended with the ability to score off hooks. But for Walton, his passing ability allowed him to have more responsibility within the offense, playing away from the basket and looking to pass with shades of how someone like Jokic plays today. Defensively, Walton was sensational. The Blazers essentially played a one-man zone. Walton would roam around the paint and block, or at the very least disrupt, nearly every Sixers shot attack. Watch here how...
It sounded like Bill Walton was a problem back in the day. They say he was the first great passing big. That's something good to know from him. I know he feels good to know, there's Jokic's out there and, different bigs that's good passers, and for him to be the first big to ever do that. Because they said Bill Russell, Wilt, them dudes wasn't doing that. they was just straight, trying to score. Like that was really, I think the one year when they was calling Will a ball hog, he decided to pass that year. But I think Bill Walton, like this was in his DNA, is to be a great passer as a big, and that's dope. That's iconic.
How he double teams Dr. J when the ball goes in the post.
And a great
on this
defender.
Ball screen, Walton is essentially playing what we now call drop coverage, years before drop coverage was ever formally named. Walton's size and athleticism combined with the Blazers' defensive game plan were too much for the 76ers.
Okay. And that's where we're going to stop this video at. Ooh, the next one is going to be the 1980 Celtics versus Lakers. So we're going to get to that video real soon, man. But I appreciate y'all like always. We out.